Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Danny here, and today I'm bringing you guys a little bit of a new series that I'm starting up, which is how to get good at Call of Duty. And obviously what you see on screen here are my stats for this game, and to say the least, I think I have played a decent amount of this game, obviously putting 11 days into this game, being level 509, and as the stats show, I like to think that I'm a little bit above your average Joe. So with that being said, one disclaimer I wanted to put out right away is practice makes perfect. And as cliche as that sounds, you're going to have to play a lot of Call of Duty in order to get good. The pros didn't get there by just sitting around and looking for these tips and tricks and then suddenly, just getting good at them. And a lot of the things that I will say, throughout each episode are applicable in not only this game, but all the previous games and probably all the games in the future. With that being said, you have all of these Call of Duty games that you can practice from, all these different, play styles, from jetpacks to thrust packs to wall riding and to, just classic Call of Duty, some more fast-paced, more modern Call of Duties, all of these different Call of Duties to give you a different feel for the game and therefore allowing you to be more versatile. As each developer releases their own Call of Duty game, every single game is going to feel a little bit different from one another. So with that being said, one thing that I wanted to point out as well is that game sense is huge. A lot of people say that mechanical aim is the biggest deal. You can train your aim and your aim will carry you a long way, but it will not carry you all the way. Having the ability to have good game sense, understanding how to take your engagements, understanding where you're strongest and where you're weakest is what's going to make you the best player that you can possibly be. So with that being said, obviously I played COD for 10 years, and hopefully the experience that I'm able to retain all these years, I'm able to show throughout these next series. So with that being said, hopefully you guys will enjoy, and let's get into the first episode. So over the course of playing Call of Duty for so long, I've sort of come to learn my playstyle and learn my strengths and my weaknesses as a player, and therefore I think it's really important for everyone to understand theirs as well, right? And why might it be so important to understand your playstyle? Well, it allows you to play to your strength and avoid weaknesses, and the best players can master both and utilize them based upon their own class setup, their opponent's class setups, or their opponent's playstyles, or based upon the maps, right? If it's a big map, if it's a small map, understanding how to play around each of them is super important, right? And because of that, I think the key, takeaway from everything is being able to be adaptive at all the different playstyles that you're going to run into. For instance, if you're playing on Nuketown and your teammates is not really pushing up, then maybe you might have to play more defensive playstyle, streak up, and then have your streaks help you push out of the map, and therefore sort of indirectly ushering your own teammates out of the own spawn house and pushing up into mid map to gain map control, right? And so these small things are sort of what makes you a good player, right? You're not going to be an aggressive player all the time and be successful, and you're not going to be a defensive player all the time and be successful, right? So with that being said, I sort of already hinted at it, but there are two main playstyles, right? You can either be really aggressive or you can be really defensive. And so, within these two categories, there are a couple small subcategories that I will be going over and sort of teaching you guys their strengths as well as their weaknesses, and therefore understanding each of them will hopefully give you guys sort of an idea as to maybe what type of player you are, and then sort of what you should be watching out for or what you should be looking out for when you're playing against these different types of players, right? So and at the end, I'll recap them all, and then also give you guys sort of my playstyle and my thought process of how I manipulate sort of or exchange between all these different types of aggression or defensive playstyle. So first things first, let's go over the defensive side of things, right? The first being the corner camper. And to say the least, I think these guys are the least interesting, and to be honest, these guys are going to help you the least when it comes down to playing to get better, right? Because corner campers, essentially, they're always waiting for the opponent to run into them. They don't really understand the big heavy choke points of the map, or maybe they do and they camp the high traffic corners. But with that being said, it doesn't really train your mechanical aim because you're always waiting. You're not really relying on your reaction or your ability to flick onto opponents. You're sort of just relying on people to walk into your crosshairs, right? And with that being said, that's already one of the weaknesses for the corner camper, right? And on top of that too, if someone sort of anticipates where you are, say with acoustic sensor, or say you killed a teammate before that and his teammate follows up, it's very easy to pinpoint where you are, and you're probably gonna end up dying, in the pursuing gunfight, right? And so, the biggest thing that the corner camper has is the element of surprise, right? And so if they lose that, then they're going to be in some major trouble. And at the same time too, is that the corner campers is always anticipating, right? They're always waiting for their opponents to come into them. And therefore, if I've learned anything about like music or dance or whatever it is, and whenever you're anticipating something, you're always going to be late, right? You sort of just have to feel things, and you sort of have to get the gut feeling beforehand that something's going to happen. Therefore, you don't anticipate. But since they're always anticipating an opponent, their reaction times is always going to be slightly delayed than the aggressor, assuming the aggressor sort of has an idea of where they're at, or maybe the aggressor just has better movement or better mechanics, right? And so that's generally what you want to be looking out for whenever you're up against a corner camper, or if you're playing as a corner camper, right? The next one is what I call a house camper. This is the guy who plays Torque and plays all his razor wires and his guardians in places in a room that, let's say in a Nuketown house upstairs, and overwatching a general big portion of the map, and sort of just sitting there the entire game, right? And this guy is also another scumbag that isn't very interesting to watch, nor to play, especially to play against. Actually, that's super annoying to play against. But one thing to keep in mind is that they always have blind spots, right? There's never a place in Call of Duty where you can walk through the entire map through one window. That's just not possible, right? And if there was, that's just poor map design, right? But with that being said, you can stay to the blind spots of them, and eventually, you can either use Heat Wave to smoke them out. You could use, batteries, cluster grenades, War Machine. You can use the Tempest to shoot down their, things. You can use Zero to EMP their things. You can just have if you see that a teammate is pushing them, push with the teammate, and therefore, put them in a 2v1 situation, right? And so generally these guys as well, since they're going to be more defensive players, and they're going to be more like campy, and therefore in their nature of like winning gunfights or, taking on double aggression is going to be really difficult for them. They're not going to be used to it, and overall, I don't think that if you play this play style, you're going to get really that much better as a player. You may understand, how to control that one room, but in all general honesty, you're going to be hard countered whenever, 2v1s happen, or whenever, they have a Zero or Firebreak really making your life miserable, right? So just something to keep in mind. The third type of defensive player is the area patrol. Basically, this is a guy who picks one part of the map, whether it be a house, whether it be, one side of the map, whether it be one corner of the map, whatever it is, this guy just continues to really understand sort of where all the choke points all the choke points of that location is. For instance, maybe someone just wants to control the backyard of one of the houses in Nuketown, and he just, head glitches on some of the walls, or he switches the size of the fence that he wants to peek out from. This guy sort of understands how to win their engagements through the different spots that they could use to their advantage when engaging in their area that they're patrolling, right? Essentially sort of playing like get off my lawn type of thing, right? But the one thing that these players face is that if there's only one of them, and you can sort of predict where they're going to be peeking in and out, you can suddenly get the jump on them instead of them getting the jump on you, right? And so you can also understand that they're always going to be within that vicinity, and these guys generally like to go back to the same spot, and in that case you can almost wait for them, right? Predict where they're coming from, predict where they like to come from, because generally these guys are going to come the same way, and they're going to try to retake that spot, and so that they're coming, and therefore it could give you a huge advantage once you kill them off that point. Now the last defensive player is someone that could also be very aggressive as well, but I like to put this as in a more defensive slot simply because this playstyle is generally slower and can be beat by a really good aggressive player, right? And this being the gun kisser, right? And now, why do I call this guy the gun kisser? Well, they're always aiming down their sights, kissing the butts of their gun. And these guys are super annoying. I think these guys are basically the guys who, just play really passive, but they like to push up and then just aim down sights around corners, which could be really annoying to play against. But this is a valid playstyle, right? Essentially what these guys do is that they just aim down their sights beforehand, and therefore they sort of have an advantage in this mid, even sometimes short range combat, right? And especially long, or not really long range. Long range, you're probably not going to be able to have that much of an advantage. It's really that mid-range zone, that short to mid-range, the area that they're going to have the advantage in, right? They're going to be aim down sights on you while you're still trying to get your sights in on them, and therefore they have this huge advantage in the ensuing gunfight. But the big thing that you can counter these guys with is if you play really up close, play to the houses, play to the corners, if you slide, it will throw off their aim assist, it will completely throw off their aim, and while they're trying to readjust, you can generally land a couple shots or even melee them. Using the shoot melee combo is super important, and with that being said, throwing off their aim is going to be a huge aspect. Getting up in their face is going to be what's making them most uncomfortable, and using your mobility to really dodge all of their shots is going to be the key factor in beating these guys. Now, moving on, the other side of the spectrum is aggression, right? And obviously there are a couple categories within aggression as well. First being my favorite, and probably the way I play most, is the hyper aggressive type, right? And this basically plays like a cowboy. You're gonna be bringing up your gun as you're jumping, sliding in, and you're gonna try to see who can snap on the other target faster. You're generally aggressing the opponent head on, right? You're not really afraid of taking on gunfights. You're not really afraid of where they're at. You're just gonna jump out, use your mobility, use that speed that you have, gain from, say, sliding or jumping or whatever it is, and sort of just shooting in their general direction and sort of hoping that things work out, right? And obviously, for the most part, a lot of players struggle against, people who jump, people who slide, and it's because they throw off the aim assist that makes this hyper aggressive player super strong, right? And so generally they'll have the element of surprise simply because they jump corners, they slide around corners, and generally the people who play this will be more accustomed to reacting faster, will be more accustomed to flicking onto their targets, and therefore their mechanics and overall game sense will get better, right? However, one thing to keep in mind is that as you're learning this playstyle, as you're picking up this playstyle, you have to remember is that don't jump out into the open, right? And these guys, sometimes when they're new, and even now, I do make this mistake, is I'll jump out into a gunfight and I'll suddenly run into a 2v1. I'm not expecting that second guy, but he's wearing Ghost or Dead Silence or something that doesn't allow me to detect him first on, and therefore it sort of screws me, right? As you sort of place yourself in a disadvantaged state when you jump into these spots, right? And obviously if someone plays really campy, who's entrenched in their head glitch, jumping out in the open really isn't going to be enough of an advantage for you to win out. And so these guys can be easily punished, but at the same time can be extremely rewarding if they are that much better than their opponents. Next thing is what I like to call the wall of defense, right? And this mainly applies to maps who have very controllable choke points. For instance, Nuketown, right? Something I like to do is I'll hang out in front of the yellow house. I like to keep running sort of into the house and then out in front, right in front of the red truck with the opening in the middle, and I'll keep cutting off people coming back from spawn, right? They would be in the windows, I'll shoot them, come to the garage, I'll shoot them, through the right or the left of the house, I'll shoot them, through the middle, I'll shoot them. Basically, I understand that I'm essentially this line of defense that they won't allow them to get into mid, right? And the reason why I don't play this in the defensive category, even though I call it a wall of defense, is because this is a type of aggression that requires you to push to that side of the map and therefore keep up the aggression to prevent the enemies from pushing up or making their own map control, right? You're preventing map control from the opponents, and this playstyle really only applies to maps where you can hold that line, but essentially you're just peeking in and out constantly, trying to suppress them, right? And sometimes you might have to push into the house to kill more. You might have to run because there might be more than you can take. Just basically utilizing corners and environments to quickly dodge around bullets, as well as picking more gunfights that are favorable to you. So that's just the next playstyle. But sometimes the greatest weakness to this thing is that if they cannot push to their spot, sometimes they're going to be in for a bad time, right? Because then you essentially can't get to your choke point, and then you're just going to keep feeding out in the open. So those are one of the moments that you probably have to change up your playstyle, and probably to this next playstyle, which is the flanker. Basically, there's not much that can be said. You basically flank around the enemy team, and most of your gunfights are going to be taken from the fact that you're going to shoot people in the back. You're going to flank behind them. They're not going to expect you, and you're always going to have that element of surprise. And this is a really good playstyle to mix in with, say, the wall of defense, because you want to get to that point, kill a couple people, then suddenly get to that choke point once again and start defending that line, right? However, one thing to keep in mind is that sometimes flank routes could have a camper more entrenched, and if you're taking a flank route that is very out in the open, while it might be rewarding to get to the end goal, it might be very difficult to get past the flank route, and if someone is camping you out, there's really nothing much you can do, and at that point you're not even flanking anymore, right? You're just trying to win that engagement in order to get to point A to point B, right? And so for a flanker, you generally have to vary up your flank routes and not take one all the time, unless if the enemy is just so oblivious to that route to the point where they refuse to just guard it. This playstyle is very reliant on what the opponents are watching. It also depends on how well can you gauge where the opponents like to go and sort of the heat map, I guess, of where everybody is. So those are generally the playstyles of both aggressive and defensive type players, and it's really important, as not only are these playstyles like good to understand, if you understand these playstyles from your opponents, you can lock down flank routes, you can pre-aim corners, you can slide around corners, you can sort of look for corner campers, and being able to adapt different playstyles. For instance, for me, I'm a very hyper aggressive player, right? I'll take on gunfights, I'll do whatever it takes, but sometimes when the enemies are more entrenched, maybe I'll be more of a flanker and I'll try to flank behind them, or if I realize that, say, they like to camp in the yellow house of Nuketown, then I'll sort of be this wall of defense, whereas I'll try to cut them off, I'll kill them off in the garage, I'll kill them off in the first floor of the house, and then I'll keep repelling them back and forth to the point where they kind of want to push me to kill me, and so it sort of doesn't allow them to play as defensive as they would like, and so, or on the opposite end of that, if my team is getting stomped, then I'll maybe play a little bit more defensive and actually try to patrol the house, build up streaks, then suddenly use the streaks to gain map control and push up into a wall of defense playstyle, right? So being aggressive all the time isn't always the best play, but being defensive all the time also isn't the best play. And like I said in the beginning, being able to mix and match these two different playstyles is going to be what attributes to most of your success, right? Obviously right there just now you see me jump around the corner, just take the guy head on. I know he's headed my direction, I know he's going to be looking at me, but I'm going to jump out at him regardless, and that's sort of just, once again, my playstyle showing, right? And not only this, beyond just understanding how you can play, and understanding your strengths and weaknesses, right, it affects your guns that you pick as well, right? If you're a more defensive player, you might favor tac rifles, LMGs, slower firing ARs but more heavy punching ARs, or if you're a more aggressive player like me, you might prefer shotguns, SMGs, high fire rate ARs, everything that gives you the feeling of moving fast and faster, right? And shooting fast and always, relying on your reaction time to win. But then if you're that more defensive player, like I said, you might favor the Titan, might favor the Tiger Shark, where you can just aim down your sights and be able to win out your engagements at longer ranges, sort of forcing the opponent to play into you, right? And so, overall, I don't think, obviously some playstyles are frowned upon, some playstyles are really annoying to play against. My playstyle might be read off as a huge sweat, and, that's all fair, but, at the end of the day, I hope that you guys have learned, that there are, this many different playstyles, and there might even be more that I missed, but for the most part, these are the ones that I've noticed, these are the ones that I sort of have come to understand, and, with that being said, I hope you guys have enjoyed the video and hope you guys have learned something new, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out. Oh wait, that Tempest was about to pop off.
Oh, that sucks.
Oh man.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah. Team, see what I mean? They're a bunch of bots. Fucking, you just gotta shoot.